popular wisdom says, if you want to lose a friend, lend him money. As a rule, when the time comes to repay this debt, there are hundreds of excuses and thousands of reasons not to do it. However, what to do if the amount is impressive and the money was not even borrowed but was given for safekeeping? But by the time it was necessary to return it, almost all the funds were spent? In such cases, it is not uncommon for the debtor to think of the most drastic and cruel ways of dealing with the problem. The case of Taylor Wright in 2017 shook up the quiet and cozy town of Pensacola, which is in the west of the sunny state of Florida, and became the subject of numerous detective documentaries and TV projects. The missing girl was searched for more than a month, but still found. There was no doubt about who took her life from that moment, although the killer, due to the specifics of his work, provided everything to leave no trace. But in an effort to create the illusion that the victim was still alive and had simply left town, one essential detail was missed, and it was this detail that ultimately solved this difficult case. Taylor Wright. Early years, personal life. Taylor Harper Wright, before marriage Johnson, was born in 1994, April 23rd in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and was the younger of two daughters in the family. She was a restless child from a young age, and parents, in order to direct the energy of the heiress in the right direction, decided to introduce her to sports. The girl was engaged in swimming, athletics, as well as Oriental martial arts, where she achieved considerable success. After graduating from high school, Taylor entered a prestigious college and then became a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This educational institution is considered the most selective and accepts less than half of those who apply for admission. However, the girl managed to get the necessary number of points. After receiving a diploma, she joined the police, becoming an officer in his native Jacksonville. In 2003, while still in college, when Taylor was 19 years old, she met a guy named Jeffrey Wright, with whom she had a romantic relationship. The young man was only a couple years older than her. They turned out to have a lot of common interests, so the romance developed rapidly. A year after meeting, the couple decided to move in together and start living together, and 2 years later, the young man made his friend an official marriage proposal, to which she, of course, responded with consent. By 2009, the marriage of Taylor and Jeffrey gave a crack, but the couple naively believed that everything can still be fixed by the birth of a common child, which they have long thought about. So, in 2010, the couple had a son, but contrary to expectations, the situation in the family did not improve, but only heated up even more. Young parents constantly quarreled and seemed to have completely ceased to find common ground. Nevertheless, their marriage lasted for almost 5 more years. In 2015, Jeffrey filed for divorce, indicating as a reason for adultery on the part of Taylor. She did not object, but the couple faced a long and difficult divorce process, as well as the main issue, custody of their common son. New love and loss of custody of the child. Almost immediately after the breakup with Jeffrey, Taylor took their son and moved to Pensacola, Florida, where she settled with her new passport, Cassandra Waller. Actually, the accusations of her husband in cheating were not unfounded, and Taylor had a romantic relationship on the side back in 2014. By that time, she had already left the service in the ranks of the police and became a private detective, which brought her much more income. Jeffrey's career was also going uphill, so that financially both parents could provide their son a decent life. Former spouses met exclusively in the courtroom, and all issues were solved only there. Even at the beginning of the divorce process, Taylor withdrew from their common account with her husband about $100,000 so as not to share this money and keep it. Part of the amount she transferred to her sister, part cashed out and gave to her parents, and almost half of the money she deposited with her former colleague and good friend named Ashley McArthur. Jeffrey tried to challenge the actions of the former wife through the court, but the consideration of this claim was slowed down. And here, for custody of a small son, Wright unfolded a real war. The man accused his ex-wife that she took the heir to another state without his consent, as well as prevented their meetings and communication. In addition, Taylor behaved aggressively towards the ex-spouse. She yelled, scandalized, and even attacked him when he came to visit their son. In the middle of 2016, when Jeffrey once again came to pick up the child for the weekend, which, by the way, was prearranged, Taylor tried to forbid him to do so. First, she started swearing, using foul language, and when Jeffrey did put the boy in his car, Taylor started chasing them, nearly causing an accident. This dangerous behavior became a strong argument in court, and full custody of the child was given to the father. Embezzled other people's money. Taylor was strongly disagreed with the court's decision regarding custody of her son and tried in every possible way to challenge the decision. She filed counterclaims, appeals, consulted with lawyers, and looked for a good lawyer who would represent her interests in this matter. But all of this required a lot of money, and she started spending what she had withdrawn from her and her ex-husband's joint account. It had been almost a year and a half since she had deposited about $40,000 with her close friend, Ashley McArthur. She promised Taylor to put a cashier's check for the same amount in a safe deposit box, but in fact, forging a signature simply transferred all the funds to her personal account, to which Wright did not have access. Ashley herself spent them at her own discretion, and when she was asked to return the money, they, in fact, no longer existed. After Taylor brought up the subject for the first time in a long time, McArthur began to come up with various excuses and justifications for not going to the bank with her. She had health problems, she had a breakdown at work, and the bank supposedly had a glitch and needed to wait. But time passed, and Wright realized more and more clearly that the money was not going to be returned to her. At first, she tried to talk to Ashley, whom she had known for years and whom she had trusted to the letter. But Ashley kept making excuses and telling her to wait. After a few months, Taylor moved on to threats, promising to involve her connections from her past and current jobs. Taylor realized that threats would have little effect on McArthur since she was married to a local sheriff's deputy. Eventually, Ashley called Wright on September 7th and suggested that they meet to go to the bank together and withdraw the money. Taylor agreed, but immediately sensed a catch. They agreed to meet on the morning of September 8th, and the night before, Taylor decided to hang out with Cassandra in one of the local bars, and honestly confided her fears and doubts. She felt threatened by McArthur, but Cassandra tried to reassure her that nothing terrible could happen. Mysterious disappearance or escape. On the morning of September 8th, while Taylor and Cassandra were having breakfast in their kitchen, Ashley drove up to the house in her car. Wright quickly got ready, said goodbye to Cassandra, and told her that she was going to work from the bank, so they wouldn't see each other until the evening. Waller had a strange, uneasy feeling that she couldn't find a logical explanation for. That day was the last time she would see Taylor alive. Taylor promised to call back and tell her how it went, but it was already noon, and the girl remained silent. Then Cassandra decided to dial her number herself, but the calls kept getting rejected, and towards evening, Wright received a message from her phone saying that she needed to leave town for a few days to sort herself out. She also wrote that the money issue had been resolved and asked not to be disturbed for the time being. Waller found the whole situation very strange and disturbing. After failing to reach Taylor, she went to the police on September 9th to file a missing persons report. However, the law enforcers took a nonchalant attitude and considered the messenger messages as enough reason to consider Taylor alive and unharmed. They decided to delay the search for a few days and afterward extended it some more. The search for the missing person. It was not until September 14th, after the police were contacted by Wright's concerned parents and sister, who had been unable to contact her for almost a week, that Taylor was officially reported missing and a large-scale search began. Taylor's loved ones unanimously stated that she could not just disappear like that. The girl too dear to her son, and on his call she would certainly answer. But the 7-year-old boy tried in vain to call his mom for more than a week. Moreover, almost all of the missing person's documents and personal belongings were left at home, and no transactions had been made on her credit cards since the evening of September 7th. Wright took nothing with her, and on September 9th, she stopped responding to messages, although she was still logged into her profile that day. However, everyone had already guessed that someone else was writing from Taylor's phone. Police officers searched the house in which Wright lived with her new girlfriend. They made sure that all her documents were there, which meant she couldn't have traveled far. They also came across a permit to buy a gun, but the gun itself wasn't in the house. Cassandra explained that Taylor had purchased it for self-defense and had never used it before, but had taken it with her the day she disappeared. First suspects. Already in the first interrogations, Cassandra realized that law enforcers were trying to accuse her of Taylor's disappearance and were looking for evidence to prove it. However, she managed to confirm her alibi because she had been at work since the morning, where she was seen by dozens of colleagues. After that, the detectives turned their attention to the ex-husband of the missing woman, with whom she had a very difficult relationship after the divorce. Jeffrey had a clear motive because he and Taylor were still suing for custody of their son. In addition, the ex-spouse withdrew from their joint account an impressive amount, embezzling money to himself. But soon, this version fell apart, because the man was all the time in Jacksonville and did not leave the state of North Carolina. He took care of the child, went to work, and was always visible. It wasn't until afterward that police finally decided to talk to 41-year-old Ashley McArthur, who Cassandra had been pointing out from the beginning. When she was finally called in for questioning, the lady was acting very strange and defiant. She was in high spirits, flirting with the officers, and didn't seem at all bothered by the situation. According to Ashley, she gave Taylor the full amount that day, after which they went for a little drive around town and then said goodbye. She also added that Wright looked upset and planned to leave town for a couple days to sort things out. She hasn't seen her again since that day, or even contacted her on the phone. Still, Ashley figured that nothing bad could happen to Wright because she was a martial artist, physically strong, and carried a gun with her at all times. There was no evidence against McArthur, so she was released after questioning. Nevertheless, the suspect's behavior and story raised a lot of questions. The police decided to take a closer look at the woman and found out that she had worked as a forensic technician for a long time and had visited numerous crime scenes to help collect evidence. She was keenly aware of what mistakes to avoid leaving a trail, and what evidence detectives would look for first. In addition, the data from the cell phone carrier showed that the women had been calling and texting constantly for the past couple of months, and judging by the nature of their communication, Ashley wasn't going to pay back the debt, and Taylor was very worried about that. Another oddity was that McArthur, after the interrogation, began to call the station every day to inquire about the progress of the investigation. She herself claimed to be worried about her friend, but the police realized that she just wanted to make sure that the detectives were not on her trail. New questionable details. About a week after the first interview, the cops decided to talk to Ashley again. This time, she did not look so cheerful and carefree, as she realized that she was taken thoroughly. The woman tried to put the blame on the ex-husband of the missing woman, but when she learned that he had been removed from the list of suspects, she changed her tactics. She claimed that Jeffrey could have hired someone to kill Taylor, and allegedly Taylor knew about it and feared for her life, and therefore carried a gun. In addition, McArthur allegedly recalled new details that seemed very inconclusive to detectives. She claimed that Wright was very upset that day, so they went together to the Ashley family farm to ride horses and unwind a bit. In the process, Taylor allegedly admitted that she was losing her nerve and was planning to travel to another city to purchase illegal substances, as regular medications were not helping her fight the stress she developed from her problems with her ex-husband. When asked why she did not report it immediately, McArthur said she did not want her friend to get into trouble. Nevertheless, despite the lack of solid evidence, she remained the main suspect because she had a clear motive, not to return a large sum of money. And the transaction itself was not documented, so Ashley could claim that long ago gave all the money. A new twist in the case. The police decided to trace the route of the women on the day of the disappearance of Wright on the signal of their cell phones, and found that it doesn't coincide with the one that Ashley voiced. It turned out that they had not gone to the horse farm owned by the McArthur family, but somewhere much farther out of town. Then, the suspect's cell phone signal suddenly disappeared, as she had probably turned it off. A few hours later, a message came from Taylor's phone saying she needed to leave and sort herself out, and soon the signal from that device disappeared as well. But on the morning of September 8th, Ashley's gadget was back on, already in Pensacola. The suspect probably feared that their phones would be recorded together, and therefore turned off her cell phone for a while. When asked directly about it, Ashley said her smartphone simply ran out of battery, but soon it was possible to determine the geolocation from where the last messages were sent on behalf of Taylor. The location turned out to be a long, vacant house with a plot of land belonging to McArthur's parents, which she had forgotten to mention. Detectives got a search warrant that same day and went there. Concreted corpse. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the vacant country house. The structure and the surrounding area looked abandoned, but the backyard had a suspiciously fresh bed of flowers that appeared to have been planted there recently, and the ground beneath them was still loose. The cops decided to check the strange flower bed, but after digging a couple times with a shovel, they hit something hard. The obstacle turned out to be a rectangular-shaped layer of concrete, which had obviously been used to fill a shallow hole. But the most gruesome discovery awaited law enforcement when the slab was removed, and inside it they found the skeleton of a woman with a bullet hole in the back of her head. The body of missing Wright was identified almost immediately from her dental records, but the cause of death, due to severe decomposition, could not be accurately determined. But since no other obvious injuries were found, it was assumed that she had been shot in the head. However, there was also a blunt force trace on her skull, but it was not fatal. On October 17th, Ashley was arrested, and her home was thoroughly searched, during which a bank check with Wright's forged signature was found. Ashley had used it to wire money to Taylor Wright's personal account and spent it as she saw fit. When the suspect was presented with this document, she became visibly nervous, began to change her statement, and tried to convince investigators that she had returned the money in cash from her own savings, the murder weapon, and reconstructing the timeline. Ashley and her husband Zachary had several firearms at home, but none of them matched the one that fired the bullet into the back of Wright's head. However, a revolver that belonged to the murdered woman and had been with her on the day she disappeared was soon found in an abandoned outbuildings on the property where the body was found. Ballistics testing confirmed that it was the weapon that had been used to shoot the deceased. McArthur categorically denied involvement, but became increasingly confused in her testimony. She claimed she was being framed, accusing Taylor's ex-husband or current girlfriend. She said the body had been hidden on purpose on her family property, which had not been visited in years, and the murder weapon had been left there. Due to the fact that the suspect refused to admit her guilt and cooperate with the investigation, the chronology of events of that fateful day was restored very roughly. So in the morning, Ashley herself came to pick up the victim, already knowing that she would take her life, and Taylor, suspecting something wrong, took a gun with her. Judging by the cell phone signal, the women did indeed drive around the city for a while, and apparently during that time the killer lured the victim to a country house, convincing her that she would give her the money there. Once there, Ashley likely stunned Taylor with a blow to the head, and while she was disoriented, shot her in the back of the head with her own gun. The next day, on September 9th, McArthur was caught on surveillance cameras at the Home Depot hardware store where she was buying concrete as well as soil for flowers. Trial and conviction. The defendant's lawyers insisted that all the evidence found was circumstantial and no direct evidence was found linking their client to the murder. In addition, the woman must have had accomplices, as it would have been very problematic for her to dispose of the body and cover her tracks alone. Ashley's husband became a suspect and was also arrested. During the investigation, it turned out that McArthur had a young lover, a certain Brandon Beatty, with whom she'd been dating for several years. Actually, the embezzled money that belonged to Wright she spent back in the spring of 2017 on the purchase of a small yacht for her favorite. When the defendant's husband learned about it, he agreed to testify against her and admitted that Ashley is obsessed with money and could well go to the crime for such a large sum. A key witness was soon found, a barmaid at a local club named Audrey Warren. She said that Ashley was a frequent guest of the establishment where she worked, and they were always chatting. In a state of alcoholic intoxication, McArthur became very talkative, and therefore Audrey knew about the presence of her lover and about her conflict with Taylor. In recent months, according to Warren, Ashley was constantly talking about how the world would be cleaner if Taylor suddenly died. She also went over various ways to eliminate the woman. In particular, she claimed she could easily give her an overdose by putting illegal substances in her beer, and no one would ever prove her guilty. During the investigation, financial fraud involving McArthur also surfaced. As it turned out, she had her own business of installing various slot machines, and the proceeds from them were to be divided in half between Ashley and her clients. However, the greedy woman was pocketing about 75% of the profits. When the scandal broke out, she invited her clients to her office where the documents were kept in order to prove her innocence. But during the night, a fire mysteriously broke out in the building, destroying the entire bookkeeping. Experts found clear signs of arson, and McArthur immediately blamed the disgruntled partners for everything and filed a lawsuit. In August 2019, the defendant was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of qualifying for parole after no more than 25 years. She was also additionally sentenced to 7 years in prison for financial fraud and office arson. New Year's Eve turned into a nightmare. According to statistics, the nature of a crime largely depends on the time of day it is committed. For example, during the day, economic crimes, robberies, thefts, frauds, etc., are more common. In the evening, domestic violence incidents occur more frequently. But at night, when the streets are dark and nearly deserted, and it's hard to spot a criminal, the time comes for crime and the most brutal acts of evil. Everyone knows that walking alone on city streets at night is unsafe, especially for women. However, sometimes circumstances make it unavoidable. The story of a young British woman named Rachel Moran began this way. On New Year's Eve, she needed to return home from her parents' place where she had been visiting. The distance was only about 1 mile along a route she walked daily, yet this time, Rachel never made it home, disappearing about 150 feet from her destination. She was searched for a whole month, with hopes that the missing girl might still be alive, but the truth that eventually emerged shocked all of Ireland. Who was Rachel Moran? Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in Englishcall on the island of Ireland. She was the youngest of 4 children in the family of Wanda and Ray Moran. She grew up with 2 older sisters and a brother with whom she was always very close. From a young age, Rachel absolutely loved dancing. Her parents, noticing this passion, enrolled her in a ballet studio, which she attended for many years. She even planned to connect her future with this field, either as a ballerina or a choreographer. However, as she grew older, her views and preferences began to change. Rachel was an excellent student, gravitating toward the exact sciences, and after finishing school, she entered a prestigious college to study management information systems. After studying for about 2 years, Rachel realized she had made a mistake in choosing her profession. As her creative nature took over, she decided to return to choreography and pursue higher education part-time. During this period, she met a young man named Mark, who was only a year older than her. They quickly bonded, forming a friendship that soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. About 6 months after they met, the couple decided to live together and rented a small apartment in a new cozy residential complex located just 1 mile from Rachel's parents' house, so she visited them almost every day. In the fall of 2002, Rachel started working at a local bakery, where she specialized in decorating confectionery. She fell in love with this work and seriously considered getting a second degree in culinary arts. It's worth noting that Rachel always cooked well, and it was one of her hobbies. Also, in 2002, Mark and Rachel adopted 2 cats from a local animal shelter, whom they adored and treated almost like children. The young couple tried not to leave the pets alone at home for long, fed them on schedule, and cared for them in every possible way. A New Year's Eve argument. As the celebration of the New Year 2003 approached, everyone around was busy preparing for the festivities, buying gifts for their loved ones, and choosing recipes for the holiday table. Rachel had a lot of orders at work, and she was doing her best to keep up. For the holidays, she and Mark planned to visit both their parents, but wanted to do so without leaving their cats alone at home all night, especially since one of the pets was unwell and needed special care. The couple had previously agreed on how and where they would celebrate the new year. They intended to spend some time together at home first. Then Mark planned to visit his parents, but after midnight, he was supposed to return to the apartment he shared with Rachel. Rachel, meanwhile, arranged to meet her brother at a bar, but wanted to stop by her parents' house before midnight and stay there until morning. The first part of the evening went according to plan. The couple had a romantic dinner at home, drank a glass of champagne, after which Mark left to visit his parents, and Rachel's brother picked her up. Rachel spent time with her brother at the bar until around 11 p.m., after which they went together to her parents' home, where they were greeted by her father, mother, and sister, who were waiting for them at the festive table. Around 1 a.m., Rachel called her boyfriend on their home phone, but he didn't answer. After a few more unsuccessful attempts, she dialed his mobile number. When Mark answered, she asked where he was and if he had returned home, as they had agreed. Mark admitted that a close friend had invited him to a party, and he simply couldn't say no. Rachel was furious, as they had discussed that someone should be at home at night to look after the animals, one of which was not feeling well, and they agreed not to leave them alone until morning. After a brief verbal altercation, Mark said he would return by 6 a.m., insisting that nothing serious would happen in those few hours. But Rachel was beside herself with anger, insisting that someone had to stay with the animals. However, her boyfriend stood his ground, and the conversation ended in a heated argument. Upset and angry, Rachel began preparing to leave for home, even though it was already well past midnight, and walking alone on the street seemed unsafe. Her mother, hearing her daughter arguing on the phone with her boyfriend and realizing that she was planning to leave, tried to talk her out of it. Wanda urged her daughter to wait until morning, assuring her that nothing bad would happen to the animals in such a short period. But Rachel was adamant and was already getting dressed. Her mother was very worried about her and didn't want to let her go. They started arguing loudly and continued even when Rachel was already standing at the open door. Nevertheless, her mother could not convince her. By that time, Rachel's father and brother were already quite drunk and had gone to bed, so no one could accompany her. Around 1:30 a.m., she left her parents' house, and no one ever saw her alive again, vanished into the darkness. Rachel promised her mother that she would call as soon as she got home. The journey should have taken no more than 15 minutes, but an hour and a half passed, and her daughter still hadn't called. The worried mother began calling her, but no one answered either the home or mobile numbers. Near dawn, Mrs. Moran finally fell asleep on the living room couch with the phone in her hand. She woke up around 9:30 a.m. on January 1st and heard her husband talking to someone on the phone. The word daughter was mentioned, so she assumed he was speaking to Rachel. However, as soon as he hung up, he said it was their eldest daughter who had been trying to reach her sister all morning and was starting to worry. After hearing this, panic gripped the mother. She tried to call Rachel again, but her mobile was off, and when she called the home phone, a sleepy Mark answered, not understanding what was happening. It turned out that when Mark returned home after the party at 7 a.m. and didn't find his girlfriend there, he assumed she had stayed with her parents and simply went to bed. Mark was very surprised when he learned that Rachel had set out for their apartment during the night, but never arrived. He had no idea where she could be, but he was certain she hadn't been home, as she would have fed the animals first. However, the bowls were empty, and the cats were clearly hungry. The bed in their bedroom was made, and there was no sign that anyone had entered the apartment after they had left it together the previous evening. Rachel's parents, as well as her boyfriend, began calling all their friends, close ones and acquaintances, asking if they had seen Rachel or had any contact with her. But all efforts were in vain. The Moran family reported her missing to the police that same day, and despite Rachel being 21 years old, the authorities did not wait the usual 24 hours before launching an immediate search. The police inspected Rachel's apartment, as well as her parents' home where she was last seen, and spoke with all the relatives, friends, and Mark, completely ruling out the possibility that she had run away on her own. It should be added that the missing woman had a striking and attractive appearance. She was tall, slim, with beautiful facial features and long platinum blonde hair. Seeing someone like her on the street, passers-by would undoubtedly remember her, so detectives began searching for possible witnesses. Stranger in the dark. In 2002, tracking a location by a mobile signal was not yet possible, and call and message logs from the girl's phone provided no leads. All that could be determined was that the device was turned off approximately 15 minutes after Rachel left her parents' house, and judging by the time, she should have been near her own home by then. During another conversation with law enforcement, Rachel's mother suddenly recalled an important detail she hadn't mentioned earlier. It turns out that as her daughter was already outside, they continued arguing loudly at the door. Wanda didn't want to let her go, urging her to wait until morning, and at that moment, she noticed a man walking down the street, past their house. The woman even thought about asking him to accompany Rachel home, but she didn't. Wanda couldn't get a clear look at the stranger in the dim light. She only saw a silhouette in a dark jacket and hat, so she couldn't even give a rough description. However, this person could be a valuable witness, or a criminal. He needed to be found as soon as possible, so the authorities asked all local residents as well as shop owners to provide any surveillance camera footage if they had any. Detectives managed to establish that the unknown man walked past a store located about 400 feet from Rachel's parents' house, and about a minute later, the missing girl also walked past the same store. The man's face or any other identifying features couldn't be made out due to the poor quality of the recording, but it became clear that Rachel had covered about half of her route home. The search continued, and the detectives decided to use a tactic that often helped in missing person investigations. They found a girl who closely resembled Rachel, dressed her in clothing identical to what Rachel was wearing on the night she disappeared, and asked her to walk the same route at night. All of this was filmed, and then the footage of the blonde walking down the street at night was shown on the news, with a request for anyone who had seen her on New Year's Eve to come forward. The plan worked, and several people reported seeing a lone girl walking, as well as a dark male silhouette. However, one witness who was smoking on a balcony saw the man pass by first, followed by the blonde. Another witness, living near the residential complex where Rachel's apartment was, claimed that the girl passed by first, followed a few feet behind by the man. This suggested that the stranger either fell behind or that it was a different person altogether. 10 days into the search, another camera was discovered along the girl's route, located about 150 feet from her home. The footage showed Rachel walking by, followed closely by a man. There was little doubt that it was the same man, as he had a similar build and was wearing identical clothing. It appeared that at some point, the man let the girl walk ahead of him and then began following her. Disturbing clues. The large-scale search for the missing girl began within the first few days of her disappearance. Detectives marked a 10-mile search radius and involved helicopters, divers, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. They combed through streets, wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water. The search was conducted on the ground and from the air, with small streams and artificial canals being drained for thorough inspection. But time passed, and there were no results. Since her disappearance, Rachel hadn't used her mobile phone or made any transactions with her bank card, leading authorities to suspect that she was likely no longer alive. However, her relatives held out hope of finding her alive and well. 2 weeks later, a sneaker was found in a drainage ditch near Rachel's home, which her family recognized. According to her mother, Rachel was wearing that pair of shoes on the day she disappeared. A few days later, in one of the drained streams, officers found a black handbag containing a mobile phone, a makeup bag, a wallet with bank cards, and an ID card in the name of Rachel Moran. All the evidence was found within a mile of Rachel's home, leading the police to theorize that the possible criminal might live nearby. If this theory was correct, then he likely also hid the body in this area. This led to the development of a plan to conduct a door-to-door search of all residents within a 2-mile radius of Rachel's home. Naturally, this required significant time and resources, so more officers were brought in, each working with a partner to minimize risks. Grim discovery in the trash chute. Nearly a month had passed since the young woman disappeared. The door-to-door search of neighborhood residents was progressing slowly, as it was difficult to find homeowners at home. And on top of that, the police needed permission to enter the premises, which also took time. On January 28th, on Nash Court, a police officer and his assistant entered another house and were immediately met with a foul odor. The homeowner, a 23-year-old named Michael Little, assured them that there was nothing to worry about, claiming that the plumbing was clogged and he was waiting for a plumber. Visiting him at the time was his friend, Marcus, who didn't understand what the police were searching for and merely observed their actions. Nothing suspicious was found in the house, but the nauseating smell persisted, raising the officers' suspicions. The source of the odor turned out to be not the bathroom, but a narrow trash chute, which was clogged with bags of various debris. The officers decided to take a closer look at its contents, and after removing several bags, they discovered a human leg sticking out. The police immediately called for backup and arrested both the homeowner and his guest. Michael remained completely calm and even detached throughout the process, while his friend had a full-blown breakdown upon seeing the deceased girl. The body was extracted from the narrow trash chute with great difficulty, and it was unclear how it had been placed there at all. The victim was almost completely unclothed, and due to the advanced state of decomposition, determining the cause of death immediately was impossible. However, numerous stab wounds were clearly visible on the corpse. The suspect's story. Little immediately claimed that he was relieved the body had been found, as the smell had been driving him crazy. He also shared his version of events from that fateful night, but it sounded highly unconvincing. According to him, while walking down the street, he overheard the argument between the mother and daughter, from which he gathered that the girl was planning to go somewhere alone. He followed her, struck up a conversation, and they became acquainted. When they reached Michael's house, he allegedly invited her in, and Rachel agreed. According to Little, they drank a little, chatted, and then engaged in intimate relations by mutual consent, after which he fell asleep. The suspect claimed that he woke up around 5 in the morning and saw the girl in the kitchen acting irrationally. On the table lay a small bag of prohibited substances belonging to him, and he assumed that his guest had tried something from it. Then, according to him, she grabbed a knife and attacked him, but he managed to knock the weapon out of her hands and delivered several blows that turned out to be fatal. Michael attributed the entire incident to an unfortunate accident in the process of self-defense. Naturally, everyone who knew the deceased girl disagreed with this version. First of all, Rachel would never have spoken to a stranger on a deserted street at night, let alone gone anywhere with him. Secondly, she would never have cheated on her boyfriend. And thirdly, she had never used any prohibited substances in her life. The autopsy revealed that the girl had been subjected to intimate violence, as evidenced by the characteristic internal injuries, and traces of Little's seminal fluid were found inside her. Moreover, the victim's body had 27 stab wounds, which did not look like self-defense, and a third of them were inflicted from behind. Who is Michael Little? After the suspect's arrest, law enforcement reviewed his background and discovered that this young man already had an extensive criminal record. He grew up in a troubled family and had been caught stealing multiple times while still in school. Incidentally, he never finished school, and as a result, due to the lack of basic education, he couldn't find even a somewhat decent job, lived on benefits, and also on what he obtained illegally. He had been arrested several times for possession and distribution of prohibited substances. Acquaintances described Little as a pathological liar. He constantly boasted about his intimate exploits and the impressive number of lovers, though in reality, all the girls tried to avoid this strange and aggressive guy. Recently, however, Michael had been increasingly telling stories about a tall blonde he was allegedly dating, though no one had ever seen her with him. Law enforcement speculated that the suspect might have previously seen the victim since they lived in the same neighborhood, with their homes just a few hundred feet apart. It's likely that he developed an interest in the girl and began fantasizing, telling his friends about her. On that fateful night, seeing her alone on the street, the criminal decided to seize the opportunity and attack her. However, the victim and her assailant had not been acquainted before. A new, even stranger version. As the investigation continued, the suspect unexpectedly retracted his initial statements and presented an entirely different version, claiming that his friend Marcus, who was arrested along with him, was the real criminal. Allegedly, Marcus was the one who met the girl on the street that night and brought her to his house. They drank together, and then the guest began showing interest in the homeowner, leading them to retreat to his bedroom. After the intimate encounter, according to the accused, an enraged Marcus burst into the room, furious that Rachel had chosen someone else over him. He attacked the girl with a knife, ending her life, and then threatened Michael with violence, demanding that he help hide the body and remain silent about what had happened. Naturally, no one believed this story, although the accused and his lawyer insisted that this was exactly how things had unfolded. However, no evidence linked Marcus to the crime. He had an alibi for New Year's Eve, and his reaction when the body was discovered indicated that he had no idea about the nightmare that had occurred in his friend's house. Trial and sentence. Michael never admitted his guilt, so the exact sequence of events from that fateful night could only be partially reconstructed. It was determined that on December 31st, 2002, Little attended a party and was preparing to celebrate the new year with friends. At the party, he tried to flirt with one girl but was rudely rejected, and then with another but with the same result. Angry and intoxicated, Michael left the event and headed home, where he happened to cross paths with Rachel, upon whom he unleashed all his pent-up rage. He overheard the girl arguing with her mother and decided to follow her. At some point, the criminal turned off the road into a dark alley and waited for his victim to pass by, then followed her. As they walked past Michael's house, he attacked Rachel, stabbing her several times in the back. It's likely that he then dragged the unfortunate girl into his home, where he took advantage of her, then finished her off with the same knife and hid her body in the trash chute. In October 2003, Little was found guilty of assaulting and taking the life of Rachel Moran. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 35 years. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila, for the first time, didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch Labar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again, but Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. No body, no case. It was said in English law after the miracle of Campton. But in our story, there is no body, but there is a case. On a November morning in 2011, Galina Kolyadzinskaya returned home to her rented apartment on Uborovicha Street in Vladivostok and disappeared. 3 years later, her boyfriend Victor Cohen was convicted of her murder. But no physical evidence of Galina's alleged death was presented at the trial, and her parents still believe she is alive and are waiting for her return. In April 2024, Victor Cohen was released from prison, and the case regained popularity, dividing the public into two camps. Some believe that Victor served time for a crime that did not happen, while others are convinced that the sentence received for murder is too short. Let's find out together how a high-profile criminal case about the disappearance and murder of a man with no evidence progressed throughout the country, causing controversy among observers and the creation of groups to search for Galina. Viktor Polovov was born July 9, 1988 in Vladivostok. He took the surname Cohen in 2012. Parents divorced when the boy was very young, so his upbringing completely fell on the female shoulders of his mother and grandmother. In 2005, he graduated from high school, gymnasium of the Far Eastern State University. He entered the Institute of Mass Communications of the same university at the Department of PR, but after 6 months, he dropped out. In 2007, Ilona Kolyadzinskaya introduced her classmate Victor to her sister Galina, who was 3.5 years older than him. Galina Kolyadzinskaya was born on April 22, 1985 in Rostov-on-Don. At the age of 13, her parents moved to Vladivostok. The girl was distinguished by a bright appearance, stood out theatricalized manner of dressing. She was slender, well-read, and very artistic. She graduated from school, studied at an art school, then entered the Faculty of Design of the Far Eastern Federal University. Victor was smitten with her, and for the first time, he truly fell in love. Both of them dreamed of entering the Theater Institute, so Victor dropped out of school and they left their native Vladivostok for Moscow. Galina failed the entrance exams, but Vitya did not. But out of solidarity with his favorite girl, he decided to return home. Both returned to Vladivostok, where they started living together. On his return, Victor learned about his grandfather's death and the inheritance he had left him. With this money, The lovers rented an apartment in the city center, bought a car each, and decided to invest the remaining sum in a profitable business. They tried to organize a shop for the production of car tires, opened a network of donut shops, and even resold church cheque. But all projects quickly went into loss, which led the young couple in despondency. Over time, disagreements between the young people began to destroy their relationship. The couple quarreled violently, and it did not do without violence. Once Galina's friends witnessed a quarrel between them when Victor lifted his girlfriend by the neck. However, Galina sometimes did the same. She could hit her boyfriend or break the furniture in their rented apartment. Eventually, Galina started going to nightclubs more and more often, and Victor became interested in other women, running away from the problems in his current life. On the morning of November 14, 2011, Galina returned home after another visit to the club and was very much on her merry way. Victor was not at home, which made Galina furious, and at 6:43 a.m. she called him and demanded his immediate return. 15 minutes later, Victor was already in their rented apartment. A quarrel took place between the young people, as a result of which they decided to finally part ways. Instead of the previously donated car, Galina demanded 300,000 rubles from Victor, and then she would leave and not bother him. Victor gave her the money, and she left the apartment, as it turned out, forever. The next day, Galina's parents got worried and started calling her, but her phone was switched off. Victor did not answer their calls either. Only on the second day after Galina left, he contacted the girl's mother and told her that there had been a quarrel. She had extorted a large sum of money from him, then packed her things and left. "You will never see me again. Don't look for me. Tell my mom that everything is fine with me." Galina's last words from Victor's words. He also told Galina's mother that he repeatedly called her after she left, but the girl did not answer his calls either, because the phone was simply turned off. At first, friends and parents of the missing Galina were not surprised by her sudden disappearance, because she was famous for her flighty behavior and could disappear for several days. But 3 days later, Galina Kolyadzinskaya's father wrote a statement to the police about his daughter's disappearance, and the law enforcement agencies began to search for her. Specialists zealously took up the case, and Victor was first of all summoned to the station for a conversation. He was the last person to see Galina and could clarify many points of interest. During the interrogation, Victor did not deny that he often quarreled with his girlfriend, whom he had grown cold to and had another woman. Victor said that he was fed up with his scandalous girlfriend, who in a fit of jealousy could raise her hand against him or pour yogurt on his car. Once, being in an inebriated state, Galina said she would tear her rival's hair out if he continued to date her. "I didn't kill Galina. Yes, we quarreled with her. She packed her things, took all our money, 300,000 rubles, and left. Where she went, I don't know," Victor insisted. The investigation team also examined the apartment where the young people lived together, both their cars, but no traces of blood or other evidence pointing to Galina's murder were found. Victor was even tested on a lie detector. During the interview, the young man was confused in his testimony, but his involvement in Galina's disappearance was not proven. Having questioned Galina's acquaintances and neighbors, the police decided to refuse to initiate a criminal case, as no signs of corpus delicti were found. However, Galina had never traveled outside Vladivostok. She did not have a foreign passport. Victor collected Galina's belongings and gave them to her parents, and he himself moved in with his new girlfriend Tatiana and started a new life. The feelings of young people were so strong that in 2012 they decided to get married. It was then that Victor finally got rid of his father's surname, which had been weighing him down since childhood. He liked the Cohen option, which was offered by his future wife, who heard the beautiful surname in one of the movies. Everyone forgot about the missing Galina Kolyadzinskaya for several years. 3 years of married life of a young married couple, Cohen flew quite happily. They traveled a lot, went to the mountains, and lived a quiet and measured life. But everything changed when the case of Galina's disappearance was reclassified as a murder case, because for 3 years she never showed up. Galina's mother, Elena Kolyadzinskaya, did not worry much at first. She knew that her daughter was a creative and fickle nature, could go somewhere just by mood. Perhaps this explains why the case did not become a criminal case for almost 3 years, because no one insisted. In June 2014, based on the materials of the inspection on the fact of Galina Kolyadzinskaya's unknown disappearance, a criminal case under the article Murder was initiated. The girl was put on the wanted list as missing, and employees of the Crime Investigation Department began to work out various versions of Galina's disappearance, from going abroad to work in the modeling business to murder. In the course of working out the latter version, Kolyadzinskaya's ex-boyfriend came to the attention of the police. It turned out that Cohen and Galina often quarreled. The girl made him jealous scenes because of his relationship with another woman. There was also information that Galina was planning a trip to Korea. In her youth, she had already worked as a model in China and was going to continue her career in this field. Ex-boyfriend Victor Cohen became the main suspect because he was the last person who saw Galina alive. The testimony regarding the facts of Galina's disappearance, which Victor and witnesses had previously given at various stages of the case, also gave reason to believe that Victor might be involved in the crime. On July 23, 2014, Victor was summoned for questioning, where he was detained and taken to the investigation unit. There he confessed that after another quarrel, in the morning of November 14, 2011, he strangled Galina, subsequently dismembered the body in the bathroom, put the remains in 3 plastic buckets, took them to a wooded area near the factory Variag, where he built a fire with tires, burned the body, and scattered the ashes in different places. Victor Cohen behaved confidently during the interrogation. He spoke to the investigator on "you," did not choose expressions, and swore a lot. He frankly, as at a friendly conversation, told the story of his life from birth to the present day. Experienced operatives were amazed at the coolness and cynicism with which he recalled how he dismembered and burned Galina. The former lover sat in front of the police officers with his feet on the ground and smiled. He felt invulnerable. Victor lamented to the investigator that he had originally intended to boil the body in a steamer, put it through a meat grinder, and flush it down the toilet. But he eventually abandoned this method, fearing that the sewer system would be clogged and he could be identified. At the same interrogation, he stated that he strangled Galina because she was interfering with his new relationship. According to Victor's memories, his ex-girlfriend was an unconventional person who craved attention. She often disappeared in nightclubs, and because of the fiery temper, could make a loud scandal at home. In conversations, Galina often mentioned that she would like a beautiful life of an escort model, and at the same time did not want to believe the arguments that without the provision of services of an intimate nature, such work is impossible. Victor accepted all the eccentric actions of his friend and continued to consider her a pleasant and interesting person until a certain time. From Victor Cohen's interrogation, "I was taken by annoyance. I was standing near the coffee machine. I took a coffee. As I stood there, something in me turned. There was this one person, and that was it. I went home, walked over to her sleeping, said, 'I'm sorry,' and started choking her. She woke up, started to struggle. I strangled her for a long time. Then I left the house and cried. It wasn't fear, it was frustration, loss. I realized what I had done, but as a rational person, I did not lose my temper. After the interrogation, the operatives took Victor to the house where he lived with Galina Kolyadzinskaya in November 2011 for an investigative experiment. In the apartment, Victor demonstrated how he strangled Galina on a folding sofa that night. According to him, she did not resist, as she was drunk and fell asleep. When he was convinced that she was dead, he left the apartment in a hurry and went to his car, where he came up with a cold-blooded plan to get rid of the body. Victor learned about the intricate way to get rid of the body from a documentary about India, where the bodies of the deceased are burned, and quite often use car tires for this ritual to reach the right burning temperature. Victor told the operatives that it was much easier to kill and dispose of the body than he had imagined. Late at night, Victor was taken to the very vacant lot where he allegedly disposed of Galina's remains. In pitch darkness, Cohen had to point out the specific place where he had burned the girl's body. According to human rights activists, he was taken to a place where there were no traffic or CCTV cameras, so that there was no way to prove his innocence. The case also lacked important details, which Victor himself pointed out repeatedly. It was not clear how and what he used to cut up the body, because an ordinary kitchen knife could not be used. Further, it was not quite clear how he managed to put Galina's remains in 3 buckets, and how he carried these buckets out of the entrance in full view of everyone and why no one paid attention to it. Then the investigation questioned the Bygolovs, who rented the apartment to Galina and Victor. They admitted that they were unable to contact Victor after they learned that the police were in the apartment. When they arrived to check their accommodation, they found the apartment empty. There were no tenants or their belongings. On the ceiling, they found brown-colored splatters, as the couple thought it was from coffee or tea, and there were black streaks on the wallpaper, most likely from storing car tires. But the detainee, Victor Cohen, did not know that his interrogations were recorded by a video camera. When he realized that he had told too much on camera, he recanted his testimony, stating that during the interrogation at the Operative Investigation Unit on Karbasheva Street, they forced confessions out of him using unauthorized interrogation methods, and when his wife Tatiana came to the same station, Victor was threatened that they would harm her as well. He added that the story he told during the hour-long interrogation was made up by the operative officers, and that the place where the remains were burnt was determined based on his phone billing that night. But was torture really torture? In the CCTV footage from the investigation unit, Tatiana Cohen drove up to the building at 6 p.m. She was not allowed inside, so she stayed outside. 20 minutes later, Victor was brought in for questioning, and Tatiana also entered the building around 6:30 p.m. The recording of the interrogation started at 6:38 p.m., tortured for 8 minutes, whipped out a confession, made up a colorful and bloodthirsty story in great detail. On August 11, 2015, as a result of the first court hearing, Victor Cohen was found guilty of the murder of Galina Kolyadzinskaya, and by the court verdict of August 11, 2015, he was sentenced to 9 years, 10 months of imprisonment, with serving his sentence in a penal colony of strict regime. After Victor Cohen was charged with murder, his wife Tatiana became his most faithful defense counsel, convinced of his innocence. All Vladivostok residents actively followed the story and even went out to rallies in support of Victor Cohen. People divided themselves into defenders and accusers. Victor's wife continued to fight for her husband and did not lower her hands even after the terrible news that her spouse would have to spend almost 10 years behind bars. The revealing video, which was kept in the criminal case, was shown during the court session. The case became a high-profile one because during the court proceedings, Victor said that confessions were beaten out of him by interrogators with the help of threats and torture, as evidenced by hospital discharges, where he was diagnosed with concussion and ear barotrauma. A young, handsome man with huge brown eyes had strangled, dismembered, and burned his girlfriend in cold blood. No one could believe it. Charismatic guy could become an actor. He was even admitted to the Moscow Theater Institute. True, as we already know, Victor refused to study. Friends, classmates, just acquaintances from all sides described him positively. Lawyers built their defense on the fact that in the apartment, where, according to the investigation, the murder took place, and at the place where he burned the body, not even traces of human DNA were found. There were even witnesses who allegedly saw Galina in the city after she disappeared. The public was fueled by Galina's mother, Elena Kolyadzinskaya. The unhappy woman sincerely believed that her daughter was alive. In all interviews, she said that Victor was not guilty, and Galina would soon come back and tell why she had disappeared and where she had been all this time. After the guilty verdict, Victor Cohen continued to call the circumstances of the murder, presented to the investigation, completely invented. After all, no biological traces were found at the alleged place of burning the remains of the victim. The forensic examination, conducted in Cohen's car and apartment, did not give convincing results either. The defendant was also sided with Galina's parents, who were convinced that their daughter was alive. The defendant's lawyer, Ivan Mikhailov, said at the time that the investigation had no objective evidence. The examination of the soil at the clearing, where his client allegedly burned the body, also yielded nothing. The examination did not show any biological traces. Later, it turned out that some of the case materials were also missing: inspection reports of the apartment and the car, lie detector data, and video from the camera, which were obtained back in 2011. Cohen's family and defense believed that the case was reclassified in order to relieve himself of responsibility for the unsolved crime. Galina was never found. Not agreeing with the court verdict, Victor filed an appeal and began to claim that he was not involved in the commission of the incriminated crime, and the confession was forced out of him by law enforcement officers. Diana Cohen launched a large-scale campaign in support of her husband. She appeared on various talk shows and programs, gathered rallies, actively maintained social networks, where she actively collected money for a lawyer, in return posting fake reports. On December 7, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned the verdict due to violations of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the case was sent to the Court of First Instance for a new trial in a different court. After the retrial by the Court of First Instance, Victor Cohen was also found guilty of the murder of Halina Kolyadzinskaya, and by the verdict of June 21, 2016, he was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months of imprisonment, with serving his sentence in a strict regime colony. The sentence was again appealed, but this time the Court of Appellate Instance on November 28, 2016, upheld the sentence, and Victor Cohen went to serve his sentence. After the appeal, Tatiana withdrew from all affairs, divorced Victor, and remarried. As it turned out, her role as a wife was a carefully planned game, because Tatiana began a new relationship immediately after Victor's detention. Nobody expected such a turn of events. Tatiana herself refused to comment. Despite the fact that the body of Halina Kolyadzinskaya was not found, the court ruled on the basis of circumstantial evidence against Victor Cohen, and there was plenty of it. First of all, this confession, in which Victor says that after the murder he decided to get rid of the body by grinding it in a meat grinder. He went to the shopping center Maxim for it, where he actually bought a meat grinder and a pressure cooker in the Domatechnica store. In 2015, the investigation made a seizure of records from the database of the store about the purchases of meat grinders for November 14, 2011, and in one of the records was the surname Polovov. The time on the billing and the receipt from the database of the store coincide. Also, the store administrator confirmed in court that there was no tampering with the database for the purpose of falsification. Further, Victor Cohen's cell phone billings played an important role in the verdict. On November 14, 2011, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., Victor stayed in the apartment. Most likely, he dismembered the body, and at night he took buckets with the body to the woods near the Varyag plant. Victor repeatedly reported that he called Galina after she left, but her phone was unavailable. However, Victor's phone billing showed that he did not call Galina between 10 a.m. and night. The last phone conversation he had was with Tatiana at 11:51 p.m., just in the neighborhood of the Varyag plant. Moreover, if you listen to the court sessions where the billing of Galina Kolyadzinskaya and Victor is announced, it is obvious that after Galina's disappearance, her relatives, friends, even Victor's mother called her, but not Victor himself. Given the fact that everyone is looking for Galina and Victor is under suspicion, if it were him, anyone would send at least a message to his missing friend. But Victor didn't do it. Obviously, he knew there would be no answer. Also in the case were sales receipts for 3 20-liter plastic buckets with lids and locks, bought the same day as the meat grinder. Unfortunately, there is no last name on the receipts, so it is not proven that it was Victor Cohen who bought them. But how could Galina fit into 3 20-liter buckets? Another piece of circumstantial evidence was the enamel in the bathroom. Victor dismembered Galina in the bathtub, having covered everything with foil to hide the traces of blood. He then scrubbed the tub with a metal brush with such force that he erased the enamel. In the confession video, Victor voiced that Galina had ruined the enamel on the bathtub by regularly cleaning it with alkaline or acidic products. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Galina at a supermarket in Vladivostok and at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow after she went missing turned out to be false. According to the airport's CCTV cameras, a similar girl was not found. A criminal case was opened against one of the witnesses under the article on giving false testimony. While studying this case, the only and the main question was spinning in my head. So why were no other clues found? It is impossible to anticipate and hide even the smallest details. After all, if Victor really killed Galina, at least some traces must remain. And the answer was simple. It's time. For the first few days, Victor wouldn't let the police into his apartment. He immediately moved in with Tatiana, and the owners of the apartment knew nothing about what had happened. He finally took his belongings only on December 8th. No one opened the door to the police officer who came to check on him. The police did not get into the apartment until 12 days later. They did not use luminol but simply fixed the situation. On December 10th, the owners of the apartment started renovation. The 2 cars were inspected only on December 27th. Let me remind you that Galina disappeared on November 14th. Consequently, Victor had about 3 weeks to clean the apartment and cover his tracks, and a month and a half to clean the interior of the car. Why, then, were neither traces of DNA nor Galina's remains found? According to the conclusion of experts, it is still possible to completely burn the body in artisanal conditions, and that's exactly what happened in this case. The black pieces, which Victor said he scattered in the forest near the place of burning, could be scattered by wild animals, thus depriving the investigation of the last possible evidence. Victor burned Galina, who had been dismembered into pieces, on tires, giving the right temperature to burn the bones. All that was left of her were black charred bone fragments. He did not specify the exact location of the bonfire, citing the long time lapse. He had forgotten. In order to find the remains of the body would have to sift through a sieve a huge area of the forest. But why, if the killer is found? For more than 13 years, nothing is known about Halina Kolyadzinskaya, and the last day of her life is described from the words of the man who was convicted for her murder. Assuming that Victor Cohen did not kill after all, where could Galina have gone? Experienced retired investigators in an informal conversation with journalists say that in today's world, it is almost impossible to get lost unless you are a professional in the intelligence service. In 13 years, Galina had to be found somehow. Even if she lived abroad under a false name, she could not help but leave traces. After all, even to replace her documents, she would have had to be fingerprinted, which means she would have been identified. Victor Cohen married someone else, claims torture, but never once mentions that Galina will definitely come back, that he is waiting for her, and she will definitely prove his innocence. But he knows perfectly well that the main witness is not there and cannot be. Not once did Victor say that he served time innocently, that 10 years of his life were stolen from him, that he lost his beloved wife Tatiana, who preferred not to wait for him from prison. He has no grudge against the system, no desire to fight for his honest name, to sue, to prove his innocence. He knows that the body will never be found. He burned it to the ground. There is no evidence. This gives him the opportunity to make up all these versions of the disappearance, and he behaves just as if he had served time for his crime. Now he is clean. What claims can there be? He was convicted. He served time. He has redeemed everything. An innocent person would not be so cold-blooded as to incriminate himself, and even in such detail. Despite the already closed case, many people all over the country still can't believe what happened. They are still looking for Galina on their own. For this purpose, they place ads on forums and periodically post photos of girls who resemble her very much, because Galina's parents are still waiting for her to come home. On a vast site 60 miles south of Melbourne lies a landfill. As with any dump on a large plot of land, there are towering piles of domestic waste. Birds circle over the meter-high piles, while a foul smell spreads for miles around. This place is usually devoid of people. However, in May 2004, hundreds of police officers were sifting through the trash. The scene resembled something out of an apocalyptic movie, especially when investigators and police officers donned protective suits against biological hazards and ultra-durable masks to guard against asbestos-ridden dirt. The area was littered with thousands of blue trash bags. Each day of searching was incredibly challenging. They had to check every bag. This lengthy and inevitable process significantly delayed the investigation. After 3 weeks of searching, the officers were disheartened and had exhausted their moral and physical resources. On the final day, they had one last chance to find the mother and daughter. Narelle Fraser, a young woman working in the missing persons department, had put significant effort into the search from the first day, each time apprehensively beginning the inspection of a new blue bag. Around 10 a.m. on another day of searching, an excavator pulled up another batch of bags from the depths of a massive pile of garbage for inspection. Fraser noticed a blue bag stuck at the top of the bucket. As she had done hundreds of times over the past days, she paused the search to conduct a thorough examination of the excavated trash. Climbing up the pile, the woman opened the trash bag, but seeing only a kitchen glove, she signaled to continue the search. But something was off. The investigator's intuition brought her back to the bag, and when she reopened it, she saw something else. What she had mistaken for a kitchen glove was actually a bloated, decomposing human hand. She screamed aloud. She had found them. Today, let us visit the marvelous Australia, specifically Mornington Island, where despite the beauty of the surrounding nature, mild climate, and welcoming atmosphere, a nightmare akin to a horror film occurred. In May 2004, John Sharp appeared on television pleading for help. Holding a photograph, he tearfully implored anyone with information about the disappearance of his wife and daughter to contact the police and assist in their search. As it turned out, Anna Sharp and her 18-month-old daughter, Gracie, had been missing from their home since March. Let's start from the beginning and figure out who is involved in the disappearance of Anna and Gracie Sharp. We'll learn where the mother and daughter went, and whether John Sharp could have really harmed his own family, or if someone else is to blame for their disappearance. Anna Kemp was born on September 27, 1962, in Dunedin, New Zealand. As an adult, she moved to Melbourne, Australia, hoping to build a career, find love, and live her best life. John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, to Valerie and Miles Sharp. The couple owned several pastry shops and lived a quiet, peaceful life in Mornington, Victoria. John grew up in a large, happy family with 4 older sisters. Later, the Sharp family welcomed another boy. John Sharp's early years were largely unremarkable. He had social issues and was heavily dependent on his parents. He had low emotional intelligence and lacked the ability to cope with stressors in his life. Sharp completed 12 grades but failed his exams. In addition to a lack of emotional intelligence and an unwillingness to face his own problems, he couldn't handle stress, so he tended to shift decisions onto others. After leaving high school, John took a job at the State Bank, where he met Anna Kemp. At the time of their meeting, Anna was 31, and John was 27. They were very different in temperament. He was always a loner and had no friends because he had been very shy since childhood and could only communicate freely with his family members. Anna, on the other hand, was cheerful, lively, and attentive to others. This greatly attracted John, and he showed her as much attention as he could afford. At first, she did not like him, but then she noticed his interest in her and saw how he opened up around her, transforming from a reserved, silent man into a confident and engaging conversationalist. Anna took notice, and the young couple began dating. In October 1994, they married. The ceremony was modest and took place in a close family circle. Anna's close relatives from New Zealand also attended the wedding, but they did not share her choice, thinking that Anna was too good for him. Decorum prevented them from voicing their opinion out loud, so the parents remained silent and supported their daughter's choice. However, during the honeymoon, Anna herself began to doubt the correctness of her choice. In a phone conversation with her mother Lila, she complained that she had rushed into it and that there was no real strong love between her and John. But being a devout Catholic, she accepted her choice and decided to try to establish good family relations with her husband and become a full family. They lived together for 7 long years in various places around the Mornington coast and appeared to be a perfectly happy family. But in reality, they lived their lives separately. By the end of 2001, Anna and John learned they were expecting a child. Anna was happy as she had long dreamed of having a child, but John was opposed, as they had agreed before marriage that they would not have children. Anna disregarded John's opinion and kept the pregnancy. Thus, in August 2002, baby Gracie Louise Sharp was born. The little girl had a difficult start to life as she was born with hip dysplasia. This is a congenital malformation of the joint that is corrected by wearing a special brace for a long time. The principle of such a brace involves bending the child's legs at the knee and hip joint and holding them in such a position. Wearing the brace around the clock creates certain discomfort for sleep and full life. Such inconveniences for the little newborn girl were very difficult during the first few months of life. It was expected that this condition would not create long-term problems for Gracie, but in infancy, she felt very uncomfortable and experienced significant distress while wearing the brace. But Anna cared for her daughter with complete dedication, hoping to remove the brace as soon as possible. The girl was very weak, ate poorly, slept little, required constant attention and care. Anna's time was entirely occupied with caring for her daughter. John was dissatisfied that his wife, Anna, devoted all her time to their daughter Gracie, and their marital relationship grew increasingly tense. However, Anna was unconcerned with John's feelings, as she was fully occupied with their daughter. Even after the removal of Gracie's brace, her sleep issues worsened, prompting Anna to seek professional help. The ordeal was exhausting for her. Anna quit her job to dedicate all her time to Gracie. The Sharp family was financially well off and wanted for nothing. In previous years, John had started a company in property staging and flipping, which allowed them to build a substantial financial cushion. In late 2003, the couple bought a house on Prince Street, close to John's parents' home. Soon after moving in, Anna surprised John with news of her second pregnancy. Anna was thrilled, as she had dreamed of having 2 children, but John was very displeased with the news and even once questioned whether the child was his. Despite their differences, their relationship appeared to be quite good. On March 21st, 2004, Anna, John, and little Gracie were invited to a family celebration. They seemed perfectly happy, and none of the attendees noticed anything unusual. But 2 days later, Anna disappeared. John behaved oddly. Perhaps each person grieves in their own way, but he did not report her missing to the police, nor did he look for her among friends and relatives, as if he knew where his wife was. And so it turned out. Sometime later, John confidently told Anna's mother in a phone conversation that she had run off with another man. He explained that he didn't know where she was or with whom. He also mentioned that Anna had taken her mobile phone with her. However, little Gracie stayed with John. This was most strange to Anna's relatives. They couldn't believe it, knowing that Gracie was neither needed nor of interest to John, and Anna would never have done such a thing. Anna's relatives never believed the story John told them. They knew Anna well enough to believe that she would never leave her Gracie, who still required constant care. On March 28th, John called her parents again and reported that Anna had come home by taxi and taken Gracie. He also stated that Anna would not return and that the child she was expecting was not his. This news completely dismayed the Kemp family. What John told them about Anna was not true to their daughter, but Anna's mother was adamant that her daughter would not leave the house, especially 20 weeks into her pregnancy. So who is John Sharp, a grief-stricken father and husband, or a participant in the disappearance of his own family? Over time, Anna's family received a letter via social media,
stating that she had moved to another city to start a new life with a new lover, and asked not to be disturbed until she was fully settled. In the letter, she wrote that she was unhappy in her marriage to John, was tired, and wanted to start over in a new relationship. But Anna's relatives knew she would never behave like that. She would call, talk, and not hide like a fugitive. Moreover, the letter was not written in Anna's style, which cast significant doubt on whether it was actually penned by her. The facts that Anna herself wasn't answering phone calls, that she was unreachable, and the strange letter, seemingly not written by Anna herself, compelled her relatives to contact the police. Following protocol, the New Zealand police called John Sharp, but were told the same story about her leaving him for another man. There were enough suspicions to report the case to the police in Mornington, Australia, who immediately contacted John. Sharp failed to convince the police that everything was fine, and they promptly referred the case to the Victoria Missing Persons Unit. Within a few hours, an investigative team was dispatched. However, the truth is not always obvious, and the police conducted a thorough check. They visited the Sharp home, where John remained alone. John cooperated with the investigation and appeared genuinely distraught and upset. He recounted how Anna, upon leaving for the first time, got into a blue car. He reported that Anna and Gracie had moved to Chelsea. They took all their belongings and are likely now happily living their new life without him. After John's testimony, the police asked to inspect the house, and he agreed without hesitation. The first floor looked completely normal. The inspection of the second floor somewhat surprised the investigators. The main bedroom lacked a mattress, and the children's room was missing a crib. John explained that he had sold the mattress, and Anna had taken the crib to their new home. The police then checked Anna's phone. The last calls were to an insurance company and one from an unknown number. In the first case, she wanted to add a new family member to the insurance. The unknown number turned out to be from a regular TV repairman. It turned out Anna had arranged for him to come and repair the television in their living room on March 24th, which had been broken for a long time. The police located this repairman, and he said that when he arrived for the job, John answered the door and told him that his services were not needed as the television was already working. The police also checked social networks, but Anna did not use them. Despite their efforts, the investigators found no evidence that Anna Sharp had another man in her life. John reported that Anna had come home for Gracie by taxi, but no taxi company confirmed this trip. A significant lead in the search for Anna Sharp was a bouquet of flowers she sent on her mother's birthday with a signed card. However, the words in the card did not seem like wishes from Anna, again causing her family to doubt that everything was all right with her. Bank statement details showed that the bouquet was indeed paid for with Anna Sharp's card. As there were no witnesses or evidence to support John's claim that Anna had gotten into a blue car on the purported day she left, nor was there any evidence of bus, plane tickets, or hotel bookings. Anna's friends had absolutely no information that could confirm the story that she had run off with another man. So, what happened to Anna Sharp and her young daughter? On June 10th, John Sharp was questioned by the police again, but he stuck to his story. After the questioning, John Sharp was released. However, this was a tactical move by the investigators as they had put John under surveillance, hoping to catch any clue that could aid in the search. John Sharp was a loner who hardly made any calls and didn't entertain guests, so the investigators had undercover police follow him. During this period, John gave a memorable TV interview in which he tearfully pleaded with Anna to contact him, holding a photograph of Gracie and crying insincerely. The surveillance team continued to tail him and one day caught him in a suspicious act. After the interview, he drove to Chelsea Beach. He walked cautiously, frequently looking over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching or following him. He approached a specific bush on the shore and pulled out a white plastic bag. Taking it, he returned to his car. There, he took a phone out of the plastic bag and made a call, then drove to the nearest ATM and withdrew cash. After that, he put everything back in the bag and buried it under the bushes on the beach. All these suspicious activities were captured on video by the surveillance team. Then John went home and called the missing persons department,
claiming his wife had just called him and withdrawn cash from their joint account. After obtaining video evidence of Sharp disposing of incriminating evidence in a trash bin and retrieving a credit card hidden in the plastic bag, he was arrested. During initial interrogations as a suspect, John continued to repeat his story. However, he could not explain why he buried Emma's phone and her bank card. John fell silent. The detectives knew they needed to find another way to get through to him, so they invited his parents, showed them the incriminating footage of their son on Chelsea Beach, and then sent them to talk to him. An hour later, they emerged, and Sharp was ready to talk. Initially, John Sharp stuck to his story, but eventually, he confessed to the elimination with a spear gun of 41-year-old pregnant Anna Marie Kemp Sharp and 20-month-old Gracie Louise Sharp. During press conferences with John, his parents were always present. John would interrupt the conversation and leave the room. He would feel ill. He behaved unnaturally. He would roll his eyes and cry. According to him, Anna was a tyrant with a difficult character. He decided to eliminate her to save himself. An adult man ended the life of his pregnant wife because, in his view, she stood between him and his family. But beyond his confession, the police continued to look for evidence. During further searches of the house with detection dogs in the bedroom and little Gracie's room, traces of blood were found. In the trash, they found notes where John had written everything he planned to say during interrogations. A torn photo with the name Francis was also found. Anna had hoped to name their expected son Francis. In subsequent interrogations, John Sharp detailed how he had planned the end of his pregnant wife and then his young daughter. On the evening of March 23rd, the couple argued, after which Anna went to bed, but John did not. He wallowed in self-pity, believing his marriage was unhappy. It was then he decided to retrieve his spear gun from the garage. The circumstances of buying the spear gun were quite suspicious, as John Sharp had never shown any interest in spearfishing or any sport requiring such equipment. Nevertheless, he bought 2 spears for the gun using cash, leaving no trace that could prove the purchase of the weapon. While his wife slept, he loaded the gun and returned to their bedroom. John positioned the gun just inches from her left temple and fired into her skull. The shot did not instantly end Anna's life, so Sharp took the second spear and fired again. He then covered his now deceased wife with towels to avoid looking at her face, went downstairs, and slept on the couch. The next day, John Sharp woke up and went about his day as usual. He dropped his daughter Gracie off at daycare, came home, and a TV repairman visited while Anna's body still lay in the bed upstairs. After the repairman left, John tried to remove the spears stuck in his pregnant wife's head. It was a difficult task, so Sharp decided to unscrew the shafts and leave the spear tips inside Anna's skull. Then, he dug a shallow grave in the backyard and buried her, throwing her into a dirty pit. He then casually went to pick up his daughter from daycare as if nothing had happened. The deception began. John Sharp made up an elaborate story about his wife leaving him for another man and told it to his mother-in-law in New Zealand. On March 27, 2004, John put his daughter Gracie to bed. He drank several glasses of whiskey and Coke. While intoxicated, he went to the garage and loaded his shotgun with a spear he had just purchased and buried the other 2 spear tips in the backyard with his wife. He then walked over to Gracie's crib and aimed the weapon at her head. Either Sharp closed his eyes or the alcohol prevented him from aiming, but the first shot penetrated Gracie's skull but did not cut off her life. She screamed in agony as the spear slammed into her head. Then he reloaded the gun and fired 2 more shots at Gracie. Amazingly, she survived. Finally, the distraught father pulled the first spear out of Gracie's skull and fired the final fatal shot. John Sharp later admitted that the moment he ended his wife's life, he knew he had to do the same to his daughter. He even took Gracie with him to the sporting goods store to buy new spears for the shotgun. The next day, Sharp covered his daughter's face with a towel because he couldn't bear to look at her dead face and removed the spears from Gracie's head. He then wrapped her in garbage bags, secured her body with duct tape, and threw his daughter into a landfill along with her toys and the weapons he used to end her life. Then, John exhumed Anna's body and dismembered it with a chainsaw. He wrapped the body parts in trash bags and secured them with tape. He then placed them in the trunk of his car and drove to the landfill. The investigators had enough evidence for an arrest, but did they have enough to charge and convict him? There was still hope that further surveillance might lead them to the bodies. However, after several days of inactivity from John Sharp, the team decided to arrest him and bring him back to the Missing Persons Department. John Sharp's confession to the ends of his wife and daughter was just the beginning of the horror. The task of finding the bodies he dumped at the landfill like trash was daunting. Due to space constraints, bins from the Mornington city dump were transferred to another landfill. The trash bags were traced to an incident location in Tuarong, and thanks to meticulous waste management at the landfill, police were able to pinpoint an area of about 100 square meters where they believed the bodies would be found. This saved the team an immeasurable amount of time and effort. At the end of June, extensive searches began, and for the next 3 weeks, the police meticulously sifted through the trash at the landfill near Devil Bend Reservoir. Australian winter corresponds to summer months, and almost all 3 weeks were rainy and chilly. However, the search did not stop for a minute. For the police officers searching for the mother and daughter, this case became a personal mission. They ventured out in any weather and on their days off, despite the challenges of working in protective suits, masks, and the daunting environment. After 19 days, Norelle Fraser discovered a bundle containing part of Anna Sharp's body. Later, photographs of Anna's mother and other personal items were found at the landfill, likely fallen out of the bag when it tore during handling. After this long-awaited discovery, Norelle Fraser shared that she would never forget the experience of finding Anna Kemp's body. She felt as if Anna was somehow calling out to her to be found. She also confessed that the initial thrill the team felt at the first discovery quickly faded with the realization that little Gracie must be nearby. "I just held my head in my hands and cried,
I cried for what Anna went through, for Anna's family, for humanity, I guess. At the thought of Gracie being there..." Fraser paused. By the end of July, all bags containing the remains of Anna and Gracie were found. At the trial, John Sharp confessed to the premeditated ends of Anna Campin Gracie. The adult man explained his act by saying his wife had been getting on his nerves. Therefore, he purchased a spear gun and practiced using it in the shed several days before the act. On the night of the act, after Anna had gone to bed, he grabbed the spear gun and fired at her head while she was asleep. He then buried her in the backyard. The next day, John Sharp went to a hardware store in Frankston and purchased a roll of duct tape, 2 polyethylene tarps, and an electric chainsaw. That same evening, after drinking heavily, he used the same spear gun to fire at his young daughter's head. Over the next few days, Sharp exhumed his wife from her shallow grave, cut her body into 3 parts, and disposed of her in the same manner as he had his daughter. He placed the body in a garbage bag and discarded it with household trash. As the charade continued, John began a thorough cleanup. He disposed of blood-stained mattresses and sent fake emails posing as Anna. He threw away Gracie's belongings and sent flowers to his mother-in-law for her birthday. In an effort to sustain his deception, John used Anna's bank card in a bank in Chelsea and even sent an email to her mother in New Zealand, pretending to be her. John Sharp appeared on television, pleading with his wife to contact him and her family to reassure them of her safety. "Anna, our marriage is over, but I still love you, and you are the mother of our wonderful daughter Gracie, whom we both adore more than anyone else." He signed a written statement to the police, claiming he had nothing to do with her disappearance. John Sharp continued to lie for 3 months. However, he was no actor, and his script did not have the ending he had planned. On August 5th, 2005, John Miles Sharp was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his pregnant wife and child, with no chance of parole for 33 years. He is currently held in solitary confinement due to threats and assassination attempts by fellow inmates. John Sharp, dubbed the Mornington Monster, was sentenced in 2005 to 2 consecutive life terms and is considered the worst case of familicide in Victoria. Anna and Gracie were buried in Anna's hometown. The name of their unborn son, Francis, is inscribed on their shared headstone. In Gracie's documents, the father's name is now left blank. But did John really murder his wife because of their loveless marriage and his desire not to have another child, or was there another motive? In addressing his dislike for his wife and child, he could have done what many in the modern world do, divorce and move on alone, but that's what any rational person would say. John Sharp, a true monster, chose to solve his problems by ending the lives of his loved ones. Amidst all the madness that had taken over his mind, it's clear that he had lost touch with reality. There's no other explanation.
People who have lived in the same place for a long time without moving generally know their neighbors well. They understand whom to trust and to what extent, and whom it's better to stay away from. Sometimes, neighbors, living side by side for years, become closer than some family members. They are asked to look after the house and property while the family is away on vacation or traveling. They invite each other over, and without a second thought, allow their children to accept treats from these individuals. However, sometimes the person who has lived next door for many years can turn out to be a real maniac who has just been waiting for the right moment. The case of Diana Garnica became one of the most sensational in Argentina in recent years. A lot of effort and time went into the investigation, and the criminal could have escaped punishment, as there was almost no direct evidence against him. He did not admit his guilt, and the victim's body was never found. Who was Diana Garnica? Family, early years. Diana Abigail Garnica Cisneros was born on March 30th, 2000, in the province of Tucumán, in the town of Villa Mariano Moreno El Colmenar, Argentina. She grew up in a poor, large family where she was the youngest daughter and the 7th, second-to-last child of her parents. Her parents, Ramon Garnica and Elizabeth Susana Cisneros, worked hard to provide for their many children and create at least somewhat comfortable living conditions for them. As the youngest girl in the family, Diana was everyone's favorite. Her parents adored her, and her older brothers and sisters took care of her. She did well in school, was talented in drawing, and from a young age, loved to dance. She was unusually intelligent and sensible for her age, never lied to her family, had no secrets from her mother and father, and was very close to her older sister Sonia, who essentially took care of her upbringing while their parents were at work. Since the Garnica family was quite religious, the parents, along with their children, regularly attended church and tried to live honestly and correctly. The older children also began working from their teenage years to help their parents somewhat. The younger ones kept the house in order and each had their responsibilities, which they were accountable for. Diana dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future because she always aimed to help those around her, was very kind, sensitive, and responsive. She hoped to build a successful career, help her family, and said that she would buy her parents a big house where her mom could plant a garden with flowers and fruit trees that she always dreamed of. Unfortunately, these dreams were never to be realized. Moving to a new city, parents' divorce. In 2013, after Ramon lost his job due to worsening financial troubles, the family was forced to move to Juan Bautista Alberdi, located in the same province of Tucumán. The move was extremely difficult for them, and initially their problems only increased. The relationship between the spouses, who had been together for over 2 decades, quickly deteriorated. They began to argue constantly and eventually decided that they could no longer stay together. The divorce was a severe shock for all the children, but the younger ones felt it most acutely. Diana, upon learning what had happened, was simply devastated. The world of a 13-year-old girl crumbled in an instant, and she simply could not understand what would happen next. Despite the separation, the father continued to support his ex-wife and children, but he soon started another family. Elizabeth also struggled greatly with the divorce, but her children supported her, and she was fortunate to find a decent job with a reasonable salary for that area. Gradually, the family adapted to their new reality, settled into their new home, made friends, and established good relationships with nearby residents. Across from the Garnica family lived a certain Dario Javier Suarez. He was a very pleasant, friendly, and kind 36-year-old man. He lived with his wife, Yasmina Alejandra Villarreal, with whom he was raising 4 children. He also had 2 children from previous relationships, and 1 child out of wedlock. It's noteworthy that Dario and his family moved to Juan Bautista Alberdi just 6 months before the Garnicas settled there. Perhaps that's why they quickly became close friends, as they were newcomers to the area. Previously, Suarez had lived in the province of Santiago del Estero, in the northern part of Argentina. Dario, along with his wife, 2 brothers, and some other relatives, worked at a local brick factory located just a mile from their home. His children were about the same age as Diana and her siblings. They attended the same school, quickly found common ground, and became friends. The adults also got along well, allowing their children to visit each other, even staying overnight, celebrated family events together, and became almost like family. Sonia and Diana even babysat the youngest neighbor's children while their parents were at work. First, Job and teenage romance. After the divorce, Ramon did what he could to help his ex-wife and older children, but after he started a new family, he nearly stopped sending money. The mother's job, although it provided a stable income, was disastrously insufficient for a large family. The family even started a small business making and selling homemade baked goods, but it quickly failed. The situation became so dire that in her upper school years, Diana had to drop out of school to start working and help her mother. The 16-year-old girl took a job as a caregiver, looking after an elderly ill person. Since she wanted to become a doctor in the future, Garnica thought this experience would be beneficial. Despite her young age, she approached her job with full seriousness and responsibility. She precisely followed all instructions, monitored the medication schedule, performed necessary hygiene procedures, and cooked diet-specific meals, adhering to recommendations developed by the treating doctor. Diana liked her job. She felt needed and useful, strived to do everything right, and was highly valued for it. She worked nearly every day from morning to evening, but still faithfully attended church on Sundays with her mother and sisters. She also entered into a romantic relationship with a boy they had previously gone to school with. Sometimes, in the evenings, the young couple walked in the park, simply talking and enjoying each other's company. Nevertheless, Diana adhered to the strict rules and schedule set by her mother. She always returned home by 10 o'clock in the evening, did not stay out at night, and never went anywhere without informing her family where and with whom she would be and when she would return. Sometimes she went to the city market with the neighbors and their children to buy necessities, but her mother always knew about such trips. Dario treated the neighbor's girl like his own daughter, took care of her, and even occasionally spoiled her with small gifts. When the man learned that she had a boyfriend, he paternalistically gave her advice about how boys could be deceitful and warned her not to let him deceive her or take advantage of her naivety and innocence. The girl shared this conversation with her mother, from whom she still had no secrets. Elizabeth found the neighbor's behavior somewhat strange, but she decided that it was his way of showing care, as he also had teenage daughters the same age as Diana, a strange request. On May 6, 2017, in the late afternoon, Diana unexpectedly received a call from her neighbor, who expressed a desire to help her family out of the goodness of his heart. At that time, Garnica was indeed in desperate need of money, but she was expecting a bonus soon, which she planned to spend on getting a dental prosthesis for her mom and starting repairs on their home's roof, which had started leaking after a recent rainstorm. However, Dario suddenly mentioned that he wanted to buy an air conditioner for Elizabeth as a gift and asked Diana to accompany him to help choose the right one. He insisted that Diana should not tell her mother about it because he wanted it to be a surprise, which wouldn't be possible if she knew. He set up a meeting place and once again extracted a promise from her that she would tell no one. At the moment she received this odd call, Diana was just returning home from work. The neighbor urged her to go with him right away, but she said she needed to drop off groceries she'd bought on the way home and change her clothes. Upon arriving home, she naturally told her mother everything, as she never lied or kept secrets from her. The woman found it odd, too. Although they were on good terms with the neighbors, they had never done anything like this before. Elizabeth wanted to call Dario herself to thank him and decline the gift, as an air conditioner was not a necessity for their family. However, her daughter convinced her not to do so, saying she would go to the store as promised, but would decline the expensive purchase. The girl reassured her mother that everything would be fine and that she would return home not too late. At that moment, the neighbor sent a text message to Diana's phone, stating he was already waiting for her, and again requested that she tell no one about their meeting to keep the surprise. Diana replied that she was on her way out, but then noticed that her phone was almost dead. She decided to leave it at home to charge. She met Dario at the agreed place, and that was the last time anyone saw her. A mysterious disappearance. When her daughter hadn't returned home by the evening, Elizabeth grew worried, especially since she couldn't call her because the phone was left at home. The woman waited a little longer, but as it grew dark, she started to panic. She first called her eldest daughter, Sonia, and told her everything, but she tried to reassure her mother, assuring her that her sister would return home soon and that nothing bad could have happened. As it got completely dark, the mother heard the sound of the neighbor's motorcycle, which pulled up to the house across the street. She thought Dario and her daughter had returned, so she breathed a sigh of relief. However, 5, 10, 20 minutes passed, and the girl still hadn't entered the house. Then the woman went outside and saw that the neighbor was alone. She approached him and asked about Diana, but he seemed surprised and said he didn't know anything about her and hadn't seen her that day. Elizabeth was stunned. She didn't know what to think and couldn't understand whether the neighbor was lying or if her daughter had deceived her for the first time in her life and gone somewhere else. However, the man insisted on his story and even handed her his phone to confirm he hadn't contacted her daughter. Naturally, by that time, he had already deleted all calls and messages. Dario also expressed concern about the girl's whereabouts and even offered to drive around the neighborhood with her mother to look for her and ask neighbors and the teenager's friends if they had seen anything suspicious. However, the woman declined his help, deciding to start the search herself with her older children. They walked around the neighborhood until late at night, questioning everyone they met along the way and calling all of the girl's friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen her that day, Returning home, Elizabeth decided to check her daughter's phone and saw 2 missed calls and a message from the neighbor, as her daughter had not deleted them. Fully convinced that Dario was lying, the woman decided to go to the police and also called her ex-husband to inform him that their youngest daughter had vanished without a trace. The man lived several hundred miles from his ex-wife's home, but upon hearing the alarming news, he immediately drove to her to help search for their daughter. Police indifference and the horrific scene at the brick factory. When a worried woman arrived at the police station in the middle of the night with a report of her daughter's disappearance, the officers did not take the matter seriously. They assumed that the girl had probably run off with her boyfriend or gone to a party with friends and would return home by morning. Elizabeth shared her suspicions about the neighbor and even showed the calls and messages on her daughter's phone. But the officers dismissed her concerns, saying they would not start a search until at least 24 hours had passed. Realizing they could only rely on themselves, the Garnica family organized a massive search effort. By that time, the father had already arrived from another city, and together they went to the neighbor's house to have a serious talk. However, the house was empty, dark, and quiet, and no one responded to their knocks. The family then went to the brick factory where the neighbor worked with his relatives, and there, the relatives of the missing girl made a dreadful discovery. Since Dario was the senior member of his crew, he had keys to the factory and could access it even when it was closed. That night, the lights were on, and when the girl's relatives entered, they encountered a horrifying scene. The brick-making furnaces were on, though it was a day off and the factory was supposed to be closed. Moreover, all the adult members of the neighbor's family were present. They appeared agitated and were clearly in the process of burning something in the furnaces. The Garnicas were struck by a terrible suspicion. Dario was not in the factory, and when they asked his relatives where he was and what was happening, those present tried to deflect, saying they were preparing equipment for operation and conducting maintenance, and mentioned that the man had just been there and might have stepped out to the restroom. However, within the few minutes that this conversation lasted, the suspect managed to leave the factory through the back door, secretly escaping. Search for evidence and arrest of suspects. After the frightening scene at the factory and the strange behavior of Dario's relatives, the missing girl's family decided to contact the prosecutor's office. By that time, almost 24 hours had passed since the teenager's disappearance, and the investigation was supposed to begin. However, it turned out that no information from the police station where the parents had reported the girl's disappearance had reached them. This situation outraged and angered prosecutor Claudio Banari, who took the case under his personal control and promised to punish the police officers who had neglected their duties. His first action was to request a warrant to search Dario's home and the brick factory. However, since it was Sunday and the judicial system was unavailable, the prosecutor, not wanting to waste precious time, decided to organize everything under his own responsibility. Banari suspected that the suspect might have attacked the teenager, assaulted her, and then ended her life, asking his relatives for help to dispose of the body and evidence. He found it suspicious that Dario's entire family was in the factory on their day off in the middle of the night and had inexplicably started the furnaces. The calls and messages from the man to his young neighbor's phone also appeared suspicious. As the family searched for the girl, including through social media, the case quickly received wide publicity, leading to various speculations and guesses. For instance, a theory widely circulated that the young beauty could have been kidnapped to be sold into slavery in a brothel or for organs. One woman even accused a specific person, although it later turned out she was just trying to settle scores with an ex-boyfriend and send him to prison. The search of the suspect's house yielded no results. Obviously, he had not brought the girl there, and the crime had occurred elsewhere. No traces were found at the brick factory either, but Banari did not rule out that the furnaces could have been used as a crematorium to destroy the body and evidence. However, these were only guesses and hypotheses. Nevertheless, the prosecutor initiated the arrest of Dario, using the data from the missing girl's phone as a key argument. His brothers Cesar and Marcus, His wife, sister, mother-in-law, and some other relatives were also arrested as possible accomplices. During interrogation, the suspect denied all charges against him, claiming he had not seen the neighbor and had not communicated with her that day. However, based on data analysis from his phone, as well as gadgets belonging to his relatives and the victim, clear discrepancies in their statements were identified. The man was charged with unlawful detainment, possible assault, and depriving the girl of her life, while his relatives were accused of criminal conspiracy and complicity. All suspects were sent to jail for 3 months during the investigation. The search for Diana. Despite the police's initial disbelief that the missing girl would be found alive, her parents continued to hope for the best. They involved an increasing number of people in the search, organized marches and rallies, engaged the media in the investigation, and demanded that Dario confess where their daughter was and what he had done to her. In desperation, the parents sought audiences with the then ministers of security and justice to influence the investigation and pressure the suspect into making a statement. Although the missing girl's relatives were received by the highest state structures, unfortunately, this did not reflect in practice. Over 200 police officers were involved in the search, as well as service dogs and special equipment including helicopters and search drones, but there were still no results. Alarming discoveries. At a brick factory in one of the kilns during a second inspection, a strange, severely melted metal object was found, along with a tooth fragment. It was suspected that this object was the piercing the missing girl wore in her nose. However, special forensic analysis was required to confirm this, and it would take time. While law enforcement awaited the results, another more thorough search was conducted at Dario's house, where notebooks belonging to the man were found containing quite suspicious notes. These appeared to be sort of personal diaries, from which it was revealed that the man was literally obsessed with his young neighbor. Everything started when the family moved in next door to his house. At that time, she was only 13 years old. The suspect did not write anything specific about what he wanted to do with the girl, but the notes made it clear that she drove him mad. He thought about her every day for years and periodically wrote letters addressed to the neighbor, in which he confessed his love in a peculiar form. After studying all the notes, investigators concluded that the man's obsession only grew over time, and he could no longer control his vile desires. In one of the last letters, he addressed the girl with words implying that she would eventually belong to him, and he would grant her eternal peace and tranquility. This entry looked like a direct threat, indicating that Dario might indeed have taken advantage of her and then dealt with her. The disappearance of physical evidence. It seemed that based solely on the entries from the diaries, the case could be brought to court, but the results of the forensic analysis were still pending. When Benari tried to find out the reason for the delay, it turned out that the evidence had simply disappeared. It was impossible to conduct a DNA analysis of the tooth fragment to determine if it belonged to the missing girl or to establish what the strange metal object was. Subsequently, the prosecutor decided to classify information about the investigation's progress, and the police officers responsible for preserving the evidence were immediately fired and also detained for criminal negligence and possible assistance to the suspects. The investigation itself, after this egregious incident, came under the direct control of federal authorities. Moreover, it soon emerged that part of the records found in the suspect's home had also disappeared. Among these was the last letter in which he promised to grant the girl eternal rest. Without these pieces of evidence, the case could simply fall apart, and the criminal and his accomplices might escape punishment. However, no measures helped determine where the physical evidence had vanished to. 3 months later, the detention period for the suspects expired, but bringing the case to court without key evidence was risky and evidently threatened a loss. What remained were data from the girl's phone and testimony from a random witness who saw the suspect and the missing girl walking together on the street on the day she disappeared. Dario's lawyer demanded that the entire investigation be declared invalid and his client be immediately released, as well as the search results annulled since they were conducted without a special warrant. The court only partially granted the defense's request. The main suspect remained in custody, but all his relatives were released, as nothing specific could be charged against them. However, in May 2019, 2 years after the girl's disappearance, Dario was also released. Over that time, the investigation had not progressed. No new evidence had emerged, and the body had not been found. The long-awaited trial and verdict. Although the main suspect was set free, the case was not closed, and the investigation continued. Occasionally, evidence and testimonies emerged suggesting Diana might still be alive. For instance, a banknote was found with a plea for help allegedly written by the girl. However, handwriting analysis established that the writing did not belong to the missing girl. Only in June 2021, more than 4 years after the girl's disappearance, Prosecutor Benari finally managed to bring this challenging case to court. But the process was constantly delayed due to the global pandemic raging worldwide, and the Garnica family felt increasingly disheartened. The relatives no longer hoped for a favorable outcome, or that the guilty would face deserved punishment. The trial only began in April 2023, 6 years after the crime was committed, with the culprit finally appearing in court. By that time, the missing entries from Dario's diaries, which everyone believed were lost forever, had been found. These became the key pieces of evidence proving the man's guilt. However, additional expert analysis was required to verify the authenticity of these documents. In addition to this, 2 new witnesses appeared in the case. One was Dario's former lover, who claimed he had seduced her when she was still a teenager. She also asserted that the suspect always had a weakness for young girls, and she was far from the only one he had treated this way. The second witness was a neighbor of Caesar, Dario's brother and probable accomplice. According to him, on the night of the girl's disappearance, the brothers arrived together on a motorcycle with a strange, large bundle in the sidecar, took some tools from a shed, and then left together. The witness had remained silent for so long because he feared Caesar could harm his family, as he was always volatile and aggressive. The defendant never admitted his guilt, claiming he would never harm the neighboring girl, to whom he felt as though she were his daughter. Nonetheless, the few pieces of evidence were sufficient to render a guilty verdict. The body of the missing girl was never found, and the events of that fateful day were painstakingly reconstructed, establishing that the man lured took advantage of the teenager and then ended her life and disposed of the remains, likely with the help of his relatives. On May 2nd, 2023, Dario was found guilty of the abduction, taking advantage of and ending the life of Diana. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in, even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, The man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. So they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life, so at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect: the anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people, ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Anderl, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target, but his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salas, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salas immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a .380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal, and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car, though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salas? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salas, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salas and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salas was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrell, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic, they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andarill. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all three men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of two men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women, who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Shipolina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, this turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Shipolina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling, since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, He was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salas, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salas, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Daniel Anderl's Law. After the attack, Mike Anderl spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salas, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members.
In 2012, the family of one of the richest people in Brazil, businessman Marcos Matsunaga, became the center of attention after Marcos disappeared on the eve of a major billion-dollar deal. The case shocked the whole country, and photos of the inconsolable widow of the millionaire did not leave the front pages of the leading national publications. Initially, as the main version, the police considered the intrigues of competitors who could kidnap and get rid of the businessman in order to disrupt the upcoming deal. However, the revealed truth turned out to be much more cruel and terrible. The story of a cold-blooded murder and a monstrous attempt to cover up the crime formed the basis of several documentaries. Who is Marcos Matsunaga? Entrepreneur Marcos Matsunaga was one of the richest people in Brazil and ran a family business producing various food products, Yoki. The company was founded by Marcos's grandfather, who had once emigrated across the ocean. His name was Yoshizo Kitano, actually, from the first letters of the surname and first name of the founder, and the name of the brand was formed. The foundation of the future business empire was laid in the middle of the last century. It is noteworthy that it all started with a small flour milling enterprise, which managed not only to survive, but also thrive during the years of crisis and war, and then transformed into a huge company with a worldwide reputation and the widest range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family, and from an early age he knew no denial of anything. He did not have to build and develop his business from scratch, because he inherited everything that his grandfather and father had created, becoming the CEO of the family food company. He had every chance to become the first billionaire in his family, and he strived for this almost all his conscious life, But such grandiose plans were not destined to materialize. Everyone who was personally acquainted with Marcos characterized him as a good and quite talented businessman, who managed not only to save, but also to multiply the family capital, several times increasing profits. But he was not an easy man. Capricious, arrogant, with a heavy character, and a constant desire to control everyone who was near him. In addition, the businessman was far from handsome in appearance. He suffered from childhood overweight, had problems with vision, because of which he wore glasses, and he was also short in stature and somewhat clumsy. All this from an early age created a lot of problems for the boy when communicating with his peers. He had almost no friends and female representatives of the female sex, and had all shunned this strange and peculiar guy. Marcos, for a long time, all failed to build a long and serious relationship with anyone, because beyond a couple of dates, it did not go. Even his own business and multi-million-dollar inheritance did not make him an enviable and desirable bachelor. He repulsed women with his arrogance and egoism, so Marcos often used the services of escorts and representatives of the ancient profession. There is practically no information about the entrepreneur's first wife in open sources. It is only known that he did not marry out of great love or passion, but rather out of desperation and at the insistence of his relatives. Despite this, the marriage lasted several years, although both spouses almost immediately began to regret their decision to start a family. At first, the young wife tried to put up with the complex character of the businessman, hoping that in time they will manage to become a happy couple where both support and understand each other. But the young woman was wrong, and over the years they only increasingly distanced from each other. Also, Marcos constantly cheated on her and did not even try to hide it or somehow justify it. And he looked for mistresses mainly on websites where girls offered intimacy for money. Alice was one of those girls. She was an escort, and her portfolio was available on the relevant platforms. It was there that the businessman noticed a bright, attractive blonde with a beautiful figure and began to regularly invite her on dates, generously paying for them. Alice was 6 years younger than him. She was born and raised in a very poor and dysfunctional family living in one of the most crime-ridden areas of the city. Alice didn't know her own father. Her mother was a heavy drinker, and she was involved with men who shared her addiction. The girl had a hard and joyless childhood. At a very young age, she was repeatedly beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's roommates. Barely finished school, Alice literally ran away from home and forever left the neighborhood in which she grew up. The girl took nursing courses, after which she got a job at a hospice. However, she soon realized that caring for dying patients is far from the limit of her dreams and abilities. In addition, sensitive and vulnerable young woman quickly became attached to people, and the death of each patient perceived as a personal tragedy. A few years later, Alice decided to get a higher education and completely change her occupation. Her choice fell on the law, which she considered a promising occupation, opening in life almost all the doors. She had long been preparing for admission and was able to score the required number of points in the entrance exams, but to pay for her studies from her modest salary as a nurse, she could not. Alice had no one to help her, because she had severed all ties with her relatives after she left home. Then, young, pretty Alice, with a slender figure, decided to earn on her external data and registered on a site specializing in the provision of escort services. There she was helped to create a bright personal page, and soon wealthy men themselves began to show interest in the young blonde beauty. Escorting and providing intimate services brought Alice a good income, allowing her to pay for her studies and fully support herself. But she planned to leave this specific occupation as soon as she got her diploma and got a job in her specialty. During this period, Alice met Marcos, who became one of her regular customers. He was generous with gifts and met regularly with Alice without hiding from anyone. She knew that the businessman was married, but at the time she couldn't have dreamed that one of the richest men in the country would leave his wife for her. The story of Alice Matsunaga was like a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged family, engaged in providing escort services, meets a multimillionaire who soon falls madly in love with her. Marcos really literally lost his head, but now it is impossible to say for sure whether Alice herself made efforts to do so. After about 6 months, Marcos realized that he wanted not just to date his new young mistress, but to be with her permanently. he, without a second thought and regret, filed for divorce from his first wife and began to present everyone Alice as his fiancée. For obvious reasons, the businessman did not want anyone to know about how he met his chosen one and what she earned a living. Therefore, the couple came up with a quite ordinary story of a casual acquaintance in a cafe and adhered to this version. Even the closest relatives and few friends of Marcos did not guess anything. However, Alice in the family Matsunaga received not too welcome. The parents of the entrepreneur guessed that this attractive young person put into action all her charm to fall in love with the rich but ugly Marcos. And now she was going to great lengths to pretend that she did not notice his hard character. Nevertheless, when Marcos announced his intention to divorce his first wife and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. The businessman arranged a lavish wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, a large number of guests, and a huge tiered cake. After that, he moved his wife to his huge and luxurious mansion, where she became a full-fledged mistress. Matsunagi had long been known as an avid collector of expensive wines and rare weapons. For wines in his house was built a huge cellar, where the bottles were carefully sorted by year and country. And for weapons, the house had a secret room, on the walls of which from floor to ceiling flaunted firearms and edged weapons. Marcos was very proud of his collections and was constantly engaged in their replenishment. However, in addition, his house was literally full of antiques, luxury goods, and modern art, which tastelessly hung on the walls and stood literally on all surfaces. Soon after the wedding, the couple decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Alice for a long time did not get pregnant naturally. Then the couple decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here success awaited them far from immediately. When their common daughter was born, it seemed that the happiness of the couple now has no limits. The young parents were engaged in the education of the long-awaited baby girl, made plans for the future, and when the girl grew up a little, the whole family began to travel the world, getting acquainted with different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a real little princess who was brought up in love, care, and luxury. But the couple had one very specific common hobby: hunting large animals. Although it would be more correct to say that it was always a hobby of Marcos, who at different times tried to join it to his chosen women and his first wife. But most women did not just dislike this activity, it frankly repulsed them. The businessman no longer hoped that he would meet someone who would share his passion. Now many believe that Alice became interested in hunting to win even more favor Marcos and conquer his heart. At first, they visited shooting ranges together, where Alice learned how to handle different types of firearms, and afterward they went into the woods together to hunt wild animals. Alice felt no pity when she took the lives of animals and treated it as a kind of competition. Either you do it or you don't. Marcos liked this approach, and he liked to watch his wife handle her weapons and stalk her prey. He also taught her how to skin and carve wild boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together they skinned them and separated body parts, using large knives, special cleavers, and axes. In addition, the family did not have cats or dogs as pets, but poisonous snakes for which special terrariums were built, with conditions as close as possible to their natural habitat. It was the realization of another long-time dream of Marcos, who adored snakes, but his first wife did not approve of the idea of having a home terrarium. Alice had really bought Marcos off by sharing his rather strange hobbies. In the spring of 2012, the entrepreneur was preparing to make perhaps the main deal of his life and career, which would make him a billionaire and take his income to a whole new level. He was actively negotiating with several business partners, going to sell the family company, and the proceeds of the huge sum of money to invest in a new profitable business. At home at this time, Matsunagi rarely appeared because he was completely absorbed in work and the realization of his grandiose plans. He and his wife moved into an elite apartment complex located in the business center of the city, not far from the main office of the businessman's company. Marcos was away almost all the time, while his young wife was bored alone in a luxurious apartment with a panoramic view of the city. The businessman's work schedule was scheduled literally by the minute. He was lost in meetings, business meetings, and consultations with specialists. Often he did not even spend the night at home, but promised his wife that as soon as the deal was done, their lives would be completely changed and transformed. On May 19th, 2012, on the eve of the deal for $1 billion, the entrepreneur disappeared without a trace. His wife reported the incident only the next day because she believed that Marcos at work. According to Alice, in the evening he was scheduled a meeting, which could last into the night, and early in the morning, her husband was to meet with a business partner, so he took some things, warned that, most likely to spend the night in the office, and then go straight to the deal. When the next day Marcos did not return home and stopped answering his phone, Alice became concerned and reported him missing. The police immediately found out that the entrepreneur did not show up for a meeting in the evening or an important meeting in the morning, which he simply could not miss. In this regard, there was immediately a version that the millionaire was kidnapped, and most likely, his family in the coming hours will receive ransom demands. But 24 hours passed. Then the second, no ransom demands were received, and hopes that Matsunaga was still alive were literally melting before our eyes.
Investigators at this time did not sit idle and began to question relatives, friends, and business partners of the businessman, trying to find out whether he had enemies and who could be beneficial to his disappearance or the disruption of the upcoming deal. However, despite all efforts, it was not possible to find a specific person or people who might have wished the death of the businessman. He ran his business competently, was able to prioritize and plan his steps ahead, so that his strategic decisions made almost everyone always benefited. A few days later, after taking her little daughter, Alice came to the home of her father-in-law and mother-in-law to tell what she had not dared to tell the police. The young woman with tears in her eyes said that her husband has long been cheating on her with a girl named Natasha Villarreal Lima and did not hide it. True, after several major quarrels and threats to divorce, Marcos promised that he would leave the mistress for the sake of preserving the family. In fact, the man did not stop meeting with Natasha, but began to do it more carefully, so as not to provoke another family scandals. The wife guessed everything and decided to hire a private detective to gather evidence of the businessman's infidelity. Alice had photographs and videos of her husband on romantic dates with the same Natasha. It was noteworthy that he took his new girlfriend to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented and where everyone knew him. Marcos seemed to demonstrate to others how much he disdained his wife and can openly cheat on her without hiding from anyone. As it later turned out, Natasha Lima businessman found on the same site escort services where he once met Alice. They met for about 5 months, and during that time he gave her an expensive car and also paid a large sum of money for Natasha to remove her profile from the site. The available photos and videos proving her husband's cheating, the daughter-in-law presented to Marcos's parents. She also added that she had shown all this to Marcos the day before his disappearance, but instead of making excuses and asking for forgiveness, he simply packed his things, told his wife that he was leaving her, and then left their apartment and disappeared without a trace. Based on Alice's story, her husband, giving in to passion, simply decided to run away with a new mistress. But everyone who knew Matsunaga unanimously asserted that he could not just leave the business and disappear because he was too serious about the business, which for decades built his family. Answers to many questions were found about a week later, when in a deserted area, 100 kilometers from the house of the businessman, a passerby found scattered garbage bags, inside which were the remains of a human body. The man immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and it soon became clear that the victim was Marcus Matsunaga, who was searched for all over the country. Experts determined that the businessman was killed by a shot to the head, after which his body was dismembered, packed into garbage bags, and taken to the outskirts of the city. It was noteworthy that the murderer, according to the pathologists, was either a surgeon or an experienced butcher who was proficient with a carving knife. Such a conclusion was inevitable, based on how accurately and professionally the cuts were made in the right places to separate the body parts from each other. At the first stage of the investigation did not have any concrete leads, so it was decided to start the investigation from the place where the deceased man was last seen alive. Elite residential complex where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter was equipped with numerous video surveillance cameras the records of which began to be scrutinized. It turned out that the evening before the disappearance, the couple ordered food delivery home. On the recordings of the camera in the elevator was seen as Marcos goes down to the first floor and then comes back with boxes of pizza in his hands. He enters his apartment and never leaves it again, not that evening, not at night, and not the next day. Matsunagi seems to disappear into his own home, but in the morning his wife leaves the apartment with 3 large wheeled suitcases. The footage shows that the suitcases are very heavy, and she moves them with great difficulty. The investigators had already guessed what kind of luggage it was. On the same day, the businessman's widow was taken into custody and brought to the police station to testify. At first, she tried to deny everything and stuck to the initial version that her husband had left her for a mistress. But when she was shown the elevator footage, she burst into tears and started talking. According to Alice, their family life has long since broken down, and from the former idyll is not left a trace. Her husband humiliated her, constantly reproached her with the work in the escort, saying that he pulled her out of the mud and also stated that she was a bad mother for their daughter. He also tried to control literally every move his wife made, not allowing her to make friends. When Alice once raised the topic of divorce, Marcos laughed and replied that he would leave her with nothing, take the child, and forbid her to see him. Alice said that on that fateful evening she showed her husband received from the detective pictures, which were captured Marcos with his mistress, but he only made him angry. He slapped his wife, and then, according to her, everything was as if in a fog. Alice does not remember how she got a gun in her hands, from which she shot her husband, and later, realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body, making it look as if he disappeared without a trace. Alice had experience as a nurse and was familiar with human anatomy, and her husband had taught her how to skin and cut up animal carcasses, for which they had the necessary tools at home. All that followed was a matter of technique. While Alice was cutting up and bagging her husband's body, their young daughter was sleeping peacefully in the next room. From the beginning, Alice's testimony raised many doubts and questions. In addition, it soon became clear that the very pictures and videos proving Marcos's cheating, his wife received from the hands of a private detective only on May 20th, that is, after she had killed her husband. Then, as I said, Alice took these photos and videos to the parents of the businessman, saying that Marcos had abandoned her by running away with his mistress. We also managed to find Natasha Lima, who appeared in court as a witness. According to her, Marcos himself wanted a divorce, but frankly afraid of his wife, saying that she was mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. The last time Natasha saw her lover the day before his disappearance, he complained about the constant scandals in the family and said that after the sale of the company is going to move to live in Florida, where he plans to establish a new company. Taking Alice with him was not part of his plans. He was going to divorce her and forget her like a terrible dream. Another terrible discovery was the discovery by experts of blood in the lungs of the dead man, which indicated that Marcos was still alive and trying to breathe when his wife separated his head from the body. This is wild and horrifying. Alice herself vehemently denied this, insisting that he died instantly from a bullet. The pathologist also found that the same bullet entered Marcos's head at a rather odd angle, as if he was sitting or lying down, not expecting to be shot. So he didn't even try to defend himself or dodge. This contradicted Alice's account of her husband attacking her and her trying to defend herself. On top of that, almost all the witnesses who testified at the trial denied that Matsunagi could have hit his wife. Yes, he had a difficult character, could say various hurtful words, but in life never raised a hand on anyone. Everything looked as if Alice herself made up this episode, because Marcos could not refute anything. As a result, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. Alice Matsunaga was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which many considered an extremely lenient punishment for such a crime. The parents of the deceased man are now responsible for the upbringing of their daughter.